Welcome to Three. Gill Gross, Joel Drucker, and Amy Lundy with you. Post Australian Open 2025, back for the first time in a while. And let me just start by saying, for everybody who misses us outwardly and says, "Where is Three?" We appreciate you guys. It really does mean a lot to us. I can speak for Joel and Amy in that respect. And the good news is that we don't plan on going away or taking that long a break again. But as we said, just needed to sort some things out, and what the future of the show is and what we want to do moving forward. And we'll have more on that. We're going to do a video on the Three channel to talk about all that stuff with the show itself, but we do want to get into talking about tennis on this particular show. We will have three topics for you today. We're going to talk about Novak Djokovic. We're going to talk about some on-court coaching stuff, and we're going to talk about Madison Keys. And if anybody is new to the show, we love to hit these big philosophical topics where we're not, we're really having a large discussion about we're using something that happened specifically, but we're talking very broadly. And I'm so excited to be back with you guys, Joel and Amy.
Likewise.
Me
Uh,
too.
all right, so let's start with Novak. I have long had a theory, and we've talked about it on the show before. I was looking at Djokovic's body, and I was not seeing a lot of decline. He was staying healthy. He was moving incredibly well. And it forced me, or it made me develop this theory that it was actually going to be his mind, his motivation, that was probably going to almost run out before the body ran out. And I might end up being wrong, Joel, because I think in the last year or so, and certainly if you look at this Australian Open, where the motivation, boy, did it look like he had it. He was sharp, he was focused, he was fiery. But then there was an injury, and that knocked him out of the tournament. And there have been more and more of those recently. So I don't know. Like, do you think that the take that I've kind of held for the last 3 years about Djokovic's eventual ending is going to end up being kind of off the mark?
Well, yeah, and you're saying that because you're 30 plus years younger than me. And the body is the body, man, and that's the thing in sports. And the body drives the things. That's what makes these people so good at this endeavor too, is what they can do with their body and what is motivation? What is desire? I mean, I've talked to players who are 75 years old who you could see their minds is like, just give me 6 months and I could do it. Oh, to ex players. So I think a certain form of motivation viscerally is there, but in the body doesn't not only does it not let you compete, as we saw with Novak, it stopped him in the after the one set of the semi, it makes the training part hard because now what you've got to do, you've got to dollop the training. You've got to, can't, how much do I do on Monday? What's Tuesday? What's the day off? Am I as sharp as I need to be? So it's like managed healthcare. You're just very gingerly aware of things instead of just like, okay, Tuesday, we're going. And that becomes hard because the last thing you want to do is get an injury while you're training.
Yeah, when you're young, it's just so easy to go, I'm going to go out there and outwork everybody, and that's how I'm going to win. And when you get older, it can be a little bit frustrating that, wait a minute, I really have to calibrate this. I cannot just go out and go full bore all the time, and that's not the answer. And I think in particular, Nadal realized that, and to some extent, Federer too. I just find it really interesting, almost from a science perspective, that it's around the same age that these injuries are cropping in to such an extent that they're preventing these players from finishing tournaments. And that the science would laugh at me and say, no, that there's no accident to that. That within a few months, if you have taken care of yourself and extended this as possibly as much as you can, this is when it's going to happen within a few months or years. So just as a matter of science, I find that interesting.
But what these guys have done, remember the three, it used to be 30. 30 was kind
Yeah.
of the midnight hour in sports. So 28 became the clock watching, which meant you didn't have that many recycles. And this will have implications for when we talk about Madison Keys, because the sense of midnight of your career, it was like 30. And now it's been set to more like 35, even
hmm
37. So that's an impressive thing. Hey, maybe in our lifetime it'll move into the 40s or different things. Maybe, and you'll say, oh, I don't know, but people didn't think that about past 35.
It's such a good point, and obviously we know what the end looked like for Nadal and Federer. For Federer, pretty sudden catastrophic injury. Like there wasn't a slow decline. It was kind of just like, whoa, this knee thing is a huge problem. There was a short comeback where he played decent tennis. Then he was out on the mend again, and he never came back. And then for Rafa, he wins two slams at the start of 2022. We're literally talking about a calendar slam as he's in the Wimbledon quarterfinals against Taylor Fritz. He tears his oblique, I believe it was, and kind of is just never the same after that. So very sudden, and obviously, I don't think it's really trending that way for Novak, luckily yet. But it is such a germane point, and credit to Oleg on Twitter who pointed out, this right now is the age of the big three when they won their last Grand Slam title. Federer, 36 years old, 5 months. Djokovic, 36 years old, 3 months. And Nadal, 36 years old, 2 days.
That is a gold medal nugget.
It
Wow,
really is, isn't
I
it?
like that one. That's one of those like, golly, why didn't I think of that? Bam, that's great. Love
That
that.
said, if there's anyone who's going to bust through that, it's going to be Novak. Because
100%.
as Novak's father said, he's going to break all the records. So,
No, I mean, totally. And I'll tell you, there was a huge silver lining for this Australian Open. It didn't have the same feel of some of the events or some of the majors that we saw Djokovic play in last year. Uh, Australian Open obviously was a bad performance in the end against Sinner that was like abnormally poor for him to the point where it kind of raised eyebrows, even though on paper it wasn't that bad a loss. And then at Roland Garros, there was a lot of battles, and he was winning them, but there were battles, and they were matches that probably, if Novak were truly at his best, he would have won more easily. And then at Wimbledon, it wasn't that close against Alcaraz in the final. Okay, then he wins the Olympics, and then at the U.S. Open, he doesn't even look close to right at any point, including the movement. Um, at this year's Australian Open, if you look at especially the Mahach win, the Lehechka win, and the Alcaraz win, there were points where the movement looked incredible. It didn't look anything like his age.
Well, the Alcaraz match was a late career masterpiece. I mean, that's a really, in arguably more than the Olympic win, since it was the best of five at a major, and there was so much adrenaline and passion Novak brought to the Olympic match that and it was a 2 out of 3 format, so he knew there was a endpoint there. But to win a best of 5 set match against Alcaraz at this stage of his career at a major, it was a great effort. And of course, it exacted a price, but still, what a great, tremendous effort. I mean, that's one of those ones that's a late career Novak masterpiece.
mhm.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, and it's not, I guess one of the differences with the Olympics and this match is at the Olympics, he never broke serve, never broke Alcaraz, but he's just really dominant with his serve and his forehand, and he was so clutch in those tie breaks. In this match, he was breaking Alcaraz left and right. And some of the defensive plays that he made and the long rallies that he was able to come through at times, it just looked like a really, really youthful performance. So I think that's like the balance where it's like, okay, on one hand, it's another injury and they're starting to crop up more frequently. On the other hand, there was a lot of like fountain of youth athleticism stuff in that Australian Open run.
Well, his way of showing that the master still has it, like when at the Olympics, and then the 2023 Cincinnati final when he beat Alcaraz, so he can think now this Alcaraz is pretty great, and he beat Novak in 2 Wimbledon finals, but I can still have my moments. I mean, it would have been Sinner these days is a different proposition stylistically because in certain ways Sinner's more of a descendant of Novak, stylistic descendant of Novak and how he plays. So it's like, wow, it's a lot to handle. But Alcaraz, that was a great, great effort.
Amy, I love talking about, and it's been now more than a week since Djokovic Alcaraz, And I just find this a fascinating match to talk about. It's one of
Yeah.
my favorite, like, I don't know, talk show matches that I can
Hmm.
remember.
It was a
So
drama. It
drama,
was,
exactly.
yeah. Hmm.
What were some of your main takeaways from that quarterfinal, Amy?
The big one for me was that Alcaraz got perplexed and flummoxed and lost his focus and did something that was maybe seemingly a little uncharacteristic when he was looking at his box and saying, like, why is Novak hobbling around, but and yet he's winning all the long points, with his whatever it was he was doing. Um, that what Alcaraz did there was in contrast to the Alcaraz that we saw when he first arrived at the Australian Open, and I posted this video where he comes into the players area and he's glad handing and I called him the mayor of tennis because he's opening doors for the laundry attendant and he's shaking hands and patting backs and stuff like that. And then contrast that with this Alcaraz who was frustrated. And the thing that I was really pleased with was Novak's reaction in the post match to that. He was asked if he saw that, and he said, "Yes, I did see it." Honest answer. And he said, "I understand. I've been there. I've been in that situation. I know how frustrating it is." So I really appreciated that out of Novak. But, you know, I think it just proves that Alcaraz is human. He's not good. He's not bad. He's human. And that was a very human moment that he's going to have to learn from going forward and learn how to keep his composure.
I'm so with you on that. I said after because I look, I guess I had the same takeaways that while Alcaraz was clearly rattled and discombobulated at times and then really frustrated at times and all through the kind of different range of emotions based on what part of the match it was. While that is true, you also understand why that was such a difficult situation for him mentally. And like, Joel, have you ever heard a player say, "Oh yeah, playing an injured opponent who then has a physical recovery and starts playing really well? Yeah, that's easy. That's not hard."
No, everybody says that's difficult. I mean, I just thought the one that people often think about is the 89 Michael Chang, Ivan Lendl, round of 16, Roland Garros. Chang clearly in pain, and Lendl, it's a strange thing. Do I end the point quickly like I'm used to? Do I prolong it? What's this guy doing? And of course, he's wounded, but he's good, so he comes up with something. It's a very, very disorienting situation to
And
have that happen, to see that. And then Novak comes back and he's daisy fresh and he's playing great. And yeah.
yeah, and like, what did Novak say after the match? He explained from his perspective that when he got hurt, the pressure escapes your body. You no longer have the expectation of winning the match. And all of a sudden it's like you're in practice with the way you can just free up and hit the ball. And also you're offensively very clear-headed, like you have to dictate. So, I mean, Djokovic broke Alcaraz twice in that second set without really moving, and it's because he was just destroying returns. And
It's
in,
funny. Maybe we should all play. It's kind of like the mindset I have about why I know I need to move my feet more when I play in the wind. So it's kind of like, well, okay, Novak, that's fine. And this is a guy as great as Novak Djokovic. These illusions, these things we put in our head. Okay, hit the ball. It's like you're much more present-minded when
Hmm.
you're with the injury. So
yeah.
I just got to play a good point here, which means I have to hit a good shot. You think, huh, is that what we should do all the time anyway? It's an interesting training twist. You don't have a lot to go, so you got to just play a good shot, play the best possible
Yeah.
shot without fear of consequence or thinking I'm going to play the third shot will be the shot. Doesn't mean go for winners. It just means play the shot that you're most fully capable of really hitting that you've been trained to hit.
But also play relaxed. And I think that part is impossible to teach and impossible to replicate, right? It's almost like we talked about it with Federer in 2017 when he's playing an incredible level, because he's the number 17 seed at the Australian Open coming off of knee injury. And there's just like no expectation that he's supposed to win it. And okay, yeah, he's going to play totally free. He's for the first time in Federer's career, there's just no expectation. And then I think the same thing happens when you're injured. The expectation leaves your body and it makes you better at hitting the tennis ball.
Yeah, I think it can be taught. And I think this gets to a long thing I could give about the teaching business,
Okay.
about teachers who I've never seen a teacher's go after it, hit the ball. There you go. And then parents watching, and what's it going to be? And the parent watching the kid like he's the last emperor, and every shot is meaningful. You're hitting it well. It's like that is not relaxed. So I
I
think
think
this
I
can
think
be
one
taught.
thing that happens when you get injured is in the middle of competing is you let go of technique a little bit, because you can't have picture perfect technique because you're injured. So the focus actually becomes put the ball there and just do it the best you can. And a really wise and great coach once said to me that players of all stripes, of all levels, really go to technique more than they should when they make an error. And they focus too much on technique. And you'll see the pros do it. If they miss a return, they'll do a shadow swing or whatever, trying to perfect that technique. But if you remove the overemphasis on that, then you really distill down what you need to do on the tennis court. And I think that's what happened to Novak in that
Well, and the
moment.
pros don't. They don't really need to belabor technique because they possess it richly. It's kind of gets to the
Then
discussion.
why do they do the shadow strokes? And like
I
if
I
get
if
think,
I
but I
it.
think it depends. I think it probably differs a little bit. There are some pros, Amy, that I see that all the time from, and then some that I never see them shadow. So
Yeah, but I still think technique is something that pros are thinking about constantly. And I know that because of discussions that I've had with them. And I know that because of the changes that I see taking place right now. For example, Alcaraz is in the middle of a technique change. And
multiple.
I multiple, and I don't think it's cemented yet, by the way. Madison Keys made a big technique change to her serve. And I don't, respectfully, Joel, I do not accept that their technique is cemented, they've got it, and it's something that never even occurs to them
Oh,
in
I didn't.
competition.
I think it occurs to them less, but I think what happens. I think the injury that's really interesting is that right. I'm injured. I can't belabor. I gotta declutter. I can't indulge in certain thoughts.
Right.
Well, it's
Right.
also distracting, right? You're thinking
I,
about the injuries more so than you're thinking about
that's a
much
great point.
else.
Well, that'd be interesting because the adrenaline of competition, but it's just I just gotta let this I just gotta have faith in the swing. I can't afford to spend time thinking about my pinpoint or my shape. I just gotta, like Amy said, I like what things said. Get ball there.
I think the one thing that maybe didn't clutter Djokovic's mind that a lot of athletes in his position would have thought of is that overriding thought of I don't want to make this worse. Like whatever I do, I don't want to tear it so bad that I end my career. Well, I mean, if he did make it worse out there and he had to end his career, would that be the end of the world? No. No, because he's already accomplished all this. So oh God, I don't want to make it worse. Like, what if it really gets bad? That was probably removed to some level.
At a certain point, 100%. I don't think it was right away, right? Because in the second set, he was moving carefully. But then he wins the second set, or towards the end of the second set, and he also said, okay, the painkillers kicked in. That's where it was like, okay, I'm gonna go slide into the corners now again, right?
Yeah, and
It's
he
funny
did.
though. Yeah, and he did. The expectation thing we're talking about, I was gonna maybe go to coaching first, but for topic two, let's go now to Keys, and we want to have a discussion about what everyone can kind of learn from the Madison Keys title run. And part of that is mental, and part of that is about expectation. And for me, the most significant, and we've already mentioned the serve, and we can talk about some other stuff. But I think the most significant is that she accepted her career. She came to peace with the fact that if she doesn't win a major, it's actually okay, that she doesn't need to look at herself as a failure, that she can be proud of herself and that she can love herself. And you talk about taking pressure away. Well, that very, very clearly and internally takes pressure away from her, Amy, that she was able to make that mindset shift.
I am not my results. The
Right.
person that I am, the human being that roams this earth, is different than the results that I have on a tennis court. And that is a very powerful concept that takes sometimes months of hard work, and meditation and potentially therapy and reckoning with oneself to arrive at that point. And it can involve morality. It can involve, really thinking about big picture items and things like that. But it's not something you can just say, like, who I am as a person is not my results. It takes a lot of work, and she obviously put in that work, and she bought into that, and that gave her the freedom that she needed.
Right? Because people like that who are so good, very good juniors, and then in her case, reaching a semis of a major when she's still a teenager, is you get invested in the outcome world, in results and concerns and upset and frustration and all those kind of things instead of figuring out, well, define winning and to bring a certain joy. And this to me gets the thing I said earlier about the teaching model, the investment model, the agents, coaches, managers, people looking at you as a commodity that, oh, you're doing better, you're getting there. All these statements that talk about outcomes, and you see that and it really festers starting in the juniors when they're getting pretty good. Is the player any good? Oh, they're going to get there. Get where? There's all this language, and the player, like a Madison, you know, she's paying attention to that. She's hearing all those comments about how's it going? Are you doing okay? And what are the results? And good for her, the way she spoke about it. She addressed some of her own humanity. And it was very popular. I think we've all seen this. I've talked to numerous people who I play and talk about tennis with us. They say, "Can we just talk for a minute about how great it was that Madison Keys won the Australian Open? It's one of the most well
Yes.
received. Wow, isn't that great? A liked person who's worked hard and skilled and very, very nice." Yeah.
100%. And but I also think it should be acknowledged it was hard work to get there, right? And Amy, you said this, therapy specifically. Like this is and Maddie has just said flat out it was a lot of therapy. How did I do it? Therapy.
Hmm.
I wonder, and this is not a fleshed out theory. This is a total question that I'm putting out into the ether. Is there a limitation to sports psychology? And is there something to maybe just going to psychology? Like, is there anything to that?
You want to go, Amy? Or you want me? I have a thought on that.
Oh, I think it depends on the therapist. It
Sure.
completely, a really good therapist that happens to be working with an athlete, may or may not get you to where you need to be and help you with your self-discovery. Or vice versa. A really good therapist that has never done work in the sports realm could also. So that would be my answer.
I like that, and I also think that these special assignations of a psychologist have always been a cloak for like I'm just doing work on myself, but it's a performance coach, and I think some of that is a bit of a crock. In other words, it's a way like, do you think if you talk with someone who's a sports psychologist, you're not going to eventually dig into matters that relate to, let's say, your family? So it's this kind of a way that it's like anger management. It's like I'm seeing an anger management expert. It's like, you know what? You're seeing a psychologist and you're seeking to understand yourself. And that's that. If that psychologist has some insights around sports, or you can see an expert who can maybe talk to you about some sports related questions, that's fine. But I know, and I've talked to some sports psychologists who say, yeah, when I work with the players, they only want me focused on performance. It's like, what? So you're only going to talk about the toss instead of the fact that the roots of the toss? I mean, quality psychology, I mean, is about getting down to the roots of things, not the branches, not the toss, not the technique, you know, not the choking, but the family and expectations and pressure and all this stuff.
But there is still some stigma. There is
Yeah.
still some taboo within sports, and that is why a player might be more
Yes.
comfortable saying, "I'm seeing a sports psychologist."
Yeah, I know. And whenever I heard that, I personally laugh. I mean, I think it's kind of like, okay, fine, that's all good. And or people who say I'm a sport. It's like it's fine. Yeah, yes, there's stigma, but at least we've been seeing some of that eroding,
Yes,
and I hope that continues.
but you need to know, and I was kind of relating this to Zverev, in my coverage of the final. Obviously, you need to first accept that there is work to be done on the mental, and you need to decide that that's actually part of the equation. I was struck because we're talking about learning from Keys. I was struck at how obvious it seems like Zverev is not doing what Keys did, because all he could talk about after the final was that, well, first of all, I'm just not good enough. Flat out, I'm not good enough, is what he said. And then he was breaking it down technically. Well, I serve better than Sinner. Yannick does everything else in the game better than I do, and that's why I can't win. Where I think most people on the outside think, well, actually, Sasha, like, you're an incredible player. You're world number two. Like, you're absolutely phenomenal, but in a major final, you usually don't play your best when you need to, when it counts. Whether you're up two sets or you're just starting out the match, normally it seems like you're not fully there in these really big matches. So maybe that's the root of the problem, and it's not that you're not good enough.
The
I
word that I wanted to hear was yet. Like today.
Good point.
That would have been a healthy response. Like today he was the better player out there, but I've got a plan and I'm going to be working on this, that, and the other, and hopefully it'll happen for me someday. But yeah, it is stark contrast between Madison Keys and Alexander Zverev right now in terms of their outlook. And maybe he could listen to everything she said in the post championship analysis and really understand what helped her and perhaps that would help him.
Well, the words might help point him to something else that he could do. It's kind of like the way, for example, when I have friends who play and they tell me some instructional tip they learned, and they say, "Oh, you ought to try that." I said, "I'm not. That's your tip that you got through your work with your teacher." And he'll ask me something. What did your teacher tell you about how to hit a volley? I said, "We're not trading baseball cards here. I learned that tip as a result of work I did to arrive at that point of learning something, just as Madison did. You know, what she shared with the world is the result of hours upon hours of work and contemplation, therapist, herself, her husband, practice,
Yeah.
processing. It's like the residual effect of weight training. So Zverev might hear, huh, that might be something to begin working on because you can't just wear it like a sweater. I mean, but the whole way, it is fascinating. I'm glad you brought that up, Gil, about the whole way people manage outcomes and results and frustrations and all that kind of stuff. And again, the baggage that he's brought to competition his whole career as a great player. I mean, I remember the whole thing. Remember, it was he wasn't winning five-set matches. And I remember the one year at the French in about, I think it was 2018, he made some comebacks and began to prove that he could win five-set matches.
Yeah.
So, right.
Well, he had a long, long, long drought. He couldn't beat a top 10 player at a slam. And he was beating top 10 players up left and right in best of three. And he just couldn't do it at a slam. So I think that's also important to realize. Like, we're not taking a sample size of three major finals and just only going off of that. There's just a long history of, when the most important moments come. And there are some triumphs, Olympic golds and ATP finals titles, but I think that's what we've seen from Zverev.
I want
The
to finish on something on him too.
Okay, go ahead.
How a guy like that gets regarded, and I'm speaking as someone who's about 5'8", and I'm going to talk about a guy you and I both like, Gil, David Ferrer. Look at David Ferrer. He's reached a final. He's the best guy never to win one. Nobody, for example, why does it seem good for David Ferrer? He should be in the Hall of Fame, maybe. Look how good he. Oh, Sasha, you lost three of them. It's only. Oh, because tall and see a talented and a serve. It's interesting the perceptions of like someone like I always remember this thing Ivan Lendl said once. Something came about the overachiever, underachiever thing. He says that is garbage. That is just based on what other people think of what someone can do. There's nothing to do with what you really know about yourself. But Dave Ferrer, look at that overachiever. He gets the most out of his game. Oh, Sasha, you're so talented. I
Well,
just
you
want
Well,
always
and
felt with
to,
Ferrer that he was bringing himself to every match.
absolutely. But whether he's an overachiever, the overachiever, Brad Gilbert once said that for all the ways people thought he was an overachiever, he said, you know what? I didn't train enough to peak at the slams, so I left some of that on the table. I was busy winning points at other events. So it's only in the mirror can one of us tell, it's like the whole external view. Dave Ferrer, look at that guy. He's a real overachiever. Based on
and
what?
just to tag on to that,
Just to
something that
tag
really doesn't
on.
get talked about a lot with Zverev is the fact that he is a type 1 diabetic. And if you've ever known or been close to somebody who has to deal with this, it is incredibly difficult what he is trying to do to be an elite athlete, what he is doing, number two in the world. In that match, against Sinner, he did have to inject insulin twice.
Yep.
Normally, he only has to do it once, if at all. Um, it can affect your mood, and your mood can affect your decision making. So I don't think he gets enough credit for doing what he's trying to do and accomplish what he's trying to accomplish. And I hope that he gives himself some credit as well.
And he was 5'8", he'd get more credit for that. Amy, by the way, I think you're the tallest one of us, Amy.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
Yes.
I'm
so I think though it's interesting because the view of the Zverev, the game and the whole career, and he's great. Yeah, right, he's great. Look at this guy, number two in three major finals, and it's kind of an interesting question you ask it to people. What would you? It's like being the Buffalo Bills in the Super Bowl. Would you rather have never gotten to the Super Bowl, or would you rather, or lost three? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Great point.
I, that's and I'm glad you brought up the point about the diabetes because
Me
to his
too.
he doesn't invoke that. He doesn't cite that. It's like he just carries on with his tennis.
His endurance is terrific, right? Like he does not get tired in matches. So, just looking at him as a player, that's not a problem. But that doesn't mean it doesn't affect him on certain days. And I think that question at this point, I think Zverev has opened up a little bit more about it. And I would love somebody to ask that of him now. Just can you go through how it affects you on a day-to-day basis? And maybe he would be open about it and we could learn a little bit. There's one other thing I want to talk about on Keys. She let go of the idea that if she just stuck with it and kept at it, it would happen for her. So there was a certain like, oh, I keep getting close. Like, let me just stick with it. And she has talked about, I got to a point where I'm like, okay, no, I'm done. Let's just try stuff. Please,
Mhm.
let's change stuff, try stuff, experiment, do this, do that, do that. I'm done. I'm done staying the course and hoping that it happens for me. And that's where you get the serve change, the change from Wilson to Yonex when she was same Wilson racket for a long, long time. Um, and I think that's also, there's a lesson there in, I think, a balance, right? Because I think you do need to have some confidence in like what you're doing. I don't think it can just be like, I don't think you can just almost give up on your belief systems and your everything, the structures you have in place easily. But then I also don't think you can stick with those things too long and you need to be open to changing them.
Long-standing top 20 player, some skill and experience there, multiple semis, fair amount of titles won, and yeah, you're making a technical change on the most important shot in the game, which by the way, she was one of her excellent assets. This was not a
Yeah.
bad serve. This was a great serve. I've loved that Madison Keys service motion, and to go platform to pinpoint. There's that, and it's her change. I don't. It doesn't mean everyone should start doing it, but it's just kind of like she they had it. She looked at that, and then racket. Boy, that's a pretty. It'd be interesting to learn what the the properties. I should have looked for that, this of each racket and the string and the weight and how the racket is configured.
From my
Yeah, I don't know. I
understanding,
don't know much about that either. Did she hit with the blade, the Wilson
so not
blade?
really. She endorsed the blade, but it was
Okay.
a pro
Okay.
stock racket that
Okay.
was, known for being very low powered, kind of a small sweet spot, not very forgiving. And this E zone, it's a thicker beam, which means easier power. You don't need to swing as hard. A bit of a bigger sweet spot, lighter, so it's more maneuverable. I think the consensus is that it it is a more forgiving frame in the sense that if you hit the ball off center or if your timing isn't perfect, you're not going to suffer as much in terms of the shots that you're producing.
I hit with that racket. So yeah, that I can attest to that.
You got
But
it? You
she
got it?
also, yes, she also, of course, she probably ha plays with a heavier version. But she also switched strings, correct?
Yeah, so she had gut in her string bed and then she
All
went to
got?
all
Big
poly.
change. Not all
Well,
gut.
not all gut, right.
Gut in the mains, I think, or
Well,
crosses.
here's what Bjorn Fratangelo, coach and husband, he was like, "You have so much power. You don't need gut gives you the extra power. We need to put the ball in the court. Forget power. Ball
Yeah,
in the court." And they went full poly, which that makes a lot of sense.
yeah.
So there you go. So
Even though there are some players right now who are saying because of the fluffy Dunlop balls that we need to go back, that the gut is actually important now because you need to get the ball through the court. But that's a topic, a whole
that's
nother
Maybe for
topic.
the men.
Maybe for the men. Yeah.
But
that's going to be personal for the player. Madison Keys had some big swings. I think I remember a few years ago she was clocked at a speed closest to men at times. She can,
same in this tournament.
yeah,
She
Yes.
had several forehands in this tournament that were above what the men were doing. Yeah.
racket thing. Yeah, that'd be interesting to just do the tail of the tape on both those, and more importantly, the psychological part of like, okay, why not find another way to lose, you know?
Totally. All right. Topic three, on court coaching. I think we're going into year three of it. I believe, but I meant to check it before the show, and sometimes I will get my years confused. But I think we're year three, the
Yeah,
start of year three of on-court coaching. Uh, it was, officially uh, put into the rule book midway through last year, but it was on trial for a long, long, long time. The Australian Open, for the first time, put the coaches on court. They were no longer, they could be in the players box if they wanted, but they had a designated spot on court, on not on all the courts but on the big ones. So that was one thing that caught my attention. Then obviously we had Djokovic, we had Andy Murray's coaching debut at this Australian Open. And the third reason I wanted to talk about on-court coaching is that Juan Carlos Ferrero didn't have much involvement in the Djokovic Alcaraz quarterfinal. And there was a lot of questions about why Alcaraz didn't adjust his return position, for example. And Ferrero has actually become seemingly a little bit more reserved. So I think we might want to go through all of those things. But Joel, first of all, I I I know what you've said about coaching in the past, and based on that, I feel like you'll be very excited to see the change that the Australian Open made.
you are correct, sir. I love seeing the on. It's like you're gonna do it, put it on the court. In fact, I think I forget who the player said something. If you're gonna do it, do it. And you're not yelling across fans. It's got a lot more professionalization. There's still some other wrinkles that could be done with it about like I want the sh names on the shirts. I want the squad identified. Nonetheless, seeing them there, I really I really like that. As far as the interpersonal interaction goes, I think everybody's still sorting out what it's supposed to be. And it's so personal. It's so personal. I mean, think of ourselves, how much what you'd want if you had that. And it's gonna eventually it needs to be in if it's gonna happen to the pros, it should happen if anything in the juniors. And it's gonna be in the developmental operating system of a player. It's gonna change the game in a major way as it has at the pro level. And it's gonna change it more. I mean, for better or worse, I'll reserve judgment on that. But yeah, it's a big effect. I really like seeing it. Eh?
My whole thing on the coaching, because I've observed the sport for years and years and years, and I've seen the coaching going on almost constantly from the stands, or from the coach's box. So there was no way to police it. So you had to lift the lid on the whole thing. Now, the extra layer that really makes this Tennessee is if you don't like on-court coaching, like Taylor Fritz, or maybe it wasn't Fritz, maybe it was somebody else that
I
said,
think it was Fritz.
okay, it was Fritz. If you don't want to avail yourself of that, feel free not to, like your choice, dude. And there are some players who you'll notice they don't look at their box or their pod over there or whatever. It's just another layer to figure out, okay, what is my style going to be? How am I going to interact with my coach? Am I going to check in with them periodically? Not at all, constantly. It's just another kind of fun thing to watch and see how players develop with it. In terms of the pod, um, I'm a very empathetic person, okay? And my first thought was, but you can't see down there at eye level. You can't get a good sense of what's going on. And so I was bothered by that, not as a fan or a journalist, just as a person who, if I were in their shoes, I would want a higher view.
The other thing I think though that I really concerns me, and again, this will happen in juniors and it's already happening in the pros. The energy engagement between the player and the pod group is very disturbing to me. I find I'm pumping my fist at 1-1 in the second set, and the agent is giving me feedback, and we're all the camp looks like they're under siege. It's like, hey, we got to learn some things here about matches and tournaments, and how the whole energy flow how it goes through a tournament, through 3, 4, 5 sets, 7 matches. It's like, hey, look, guys, we're going to be here for 2 weeks playing 35 sets. Not everything is like the Davis Cup Finals. And go, yeah, you broke them at 1-all, go. And I think the players are going to see some of that is enervating, draining. Don't do
Right.
that. Just sit there. In fact, I would almost say, I want you guys, okay, you sit there, you guys go sit there. You know what I mean?
I think that was the reaction. I was having a conversation last night with somebody and we were saying, it's funny, Apostolos gets so much flack, right? Tsitsipas's
Hmm.
father.
Yeah.
Alexander Sr., not much. Maybe for the first time after this tournament, I started to see comments online critical of Alexander Sr. But what's the difference, right? Apostolos, I think we all watched him and we were like, oh my God, way too much. Like you're just firing away like every just constant you're bombarding Stefanos while he's playing. And I think everyone's kind of in agreement like, okay, that's probably not helpful. Alexander Sr. is like the opposite. Really doesn't say that much, although I feel like he's picking his spots more and he's actually saying more. And energy wise, Joel, to your point, I mean, that guy doesn't stand up until the match is over. And then he stands up and leaves.
The other thing with Apostolos is that the cameras love him, in part because he's very vocal and animated, and also because he's kind of like a cartoon character or something, and he's very entertaining. And so we see it a lot because the camera is trained on him a lot. And you may see one cutaway of Alex's dad in the course of a match.
Let me just say, because I didn't get my 2 cents in it. I love the pods. Like I think as an entertainment product, the coaches, if coaching is going to be legal, the coaches should should be in eye line. Like it should be that if you're in the stadium, and I know for a fact the way it used to be, fans watching a tennis match in the stadium, they did not know necessarily where the players' boxes were. Maybe the more attuned fans, the more focused fans who know what to look for could figure it out. But now you can't miss it. That's where the coaches are. And that goes a long way into making the coaches a character in the story. is that they're separate, that you can see them. So I think visually it was an improvement, and I hope other tournaments follow, even though overall I disagree a little bit with on-court coaching being legalized as a whole, but we don't need to get into that. The other thing that I want to follow up on is in terms of Juan Carlos Ferrero, I think that he has pulled back a ton. Um, I don't think he is giving Carlos as much information as he used to.
Maybe Carlos is in a different phase of his maturation. The early, welcome to the pros years, he was there, and boy, he hit it out of the park. He kind of nailed all the pre-med courses by the end of his freshman year. You know what I mean? He just kind of got straight A's. And maybe Juan Carlos is wondering, huh, because by now clearly a student has exceeded teacher in results. Not that that should matter, but I don't know. Maybe Juan Carlos, this is very new for him too. It's like, what am I supposed to be doing here? What's going on? And remember, let's even go back to not that coaching is autobiography, but Carlos Alcaraz goes about a very different way of managing his matches than Juan Carlos did. Not that Juan Carlos, he's a coach, not just a player, but I don't know. I think everybody, coaches themselves, are also searching for how do I be most effective in this kind of environment? Because in the unpoliced, in the pre-legal era, all they were doing was on the sly, go, go. They're doing little subterfuge. Now it's like, oh, I got to bring some value to this, truly.
Yeah, I think also Carlos has been making some other changes, as we mentioned, the changes to the serve. And he may want to first do no harm, like let's not give him too much. But to dovetail with what Joel just said, Andy Murray made some really interesting comments after this whole thing where he was like, I've got to learn more about coaching. I had it in my head the way this thing was going to go, and it's actually a lot more complicated than I realized. And now, if I really want to do this, I've got to learn the ins and outs of this now. So that kind of goes with what Joel was saying about Juan Carlos himself might be learning.
You guys ever coach someone in a match? You ever tried that? I've done that. You ever do that? Watch a
I've
match?
coached another sport,
No,
and
okay, but tennis.
what I learned. I mean, I was shocked at what I learned.
So I'm helping a team, and they're playing some practice match, and there's a player I'm watching, and I realize that every changeover, I've got to think, what in 30 seconds from all of my years can I bring that can be helpful to this person now? Can because you don't want to waste it. You gotta say something. Is it? And this also gets to the relationship established. It'd be interesting, for example, for the pro coaches to talk with some college coaches or former college coaches like Peter Smith, because that's a world where it's legal and it's done
True.
at any point. And they had a lot of reps doing it, thousand reps of mid-match input giving. Pros have
Look,
not.
it's a feel thing, right? It's a feel thing and it's a character based thing. I felt
Relationship based thing too. It's like,
that too.
wow, you again? Didn't we already have lunch? It's like,
I
yeah.
thought that given Alcaraz's mental state, and given the fact that there was clearly a particular Djokovic serve that was killing him, destroying him, he wasn't making any of the returns. That it would have probably made sense for Juan Carlos to be a little more active in that case. And it's so rare. This might be one of the first times ever that after a tennis match, I'm saying the coach could have done better. Like that has not been in the lexicon of analyzing tennis. But I think in this case, this might be a scenario where I looked at it, and it was certainly something that I thought more about when like people asked me about it in the mailbag. And the more I think about it, the more it's like, yeah, that was really a spot to be pretty vocal and active as a coach, in my opinion.
Well,
Well,
we're
I
all.
think if he had been sitting up, I mean, this is wild speculation, but if he had been sitting up and seeing the court, which serve was it? Was it the out wide serve?
Do side,
Um,
slice wide.
do side, slice wide. Yeah, so if he'd been sitting up and that's repeated in his brain, maybe that's something that really is hammered home. But when he's in a corner at eye level, it's not necessarily registering in that way, potentially. I don't know.
That's a great point. And also these coaches, though, I just wrote an idea. It's got a story I want to do about how to talk to a player and how you like being talked to. We're all of us are learning this because this is fairly new, and the oh, it's brand new part is kind of over. It's like now it's like okay, it's here. How does it work? How do you make it work? How do you talk to a player? What's your relationship? What's the time when it's best to just make a joke or something,
Hmm.
you know, or something, or what's pointed? It's like all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, Personally, I don't think the view is that bad from court level that you can't pick up on some of that stuff.
It's a great view. I mean, I've sat in the photographer's well before. I've seen that. It is stunning. If anyone ever gets a chance to do something
Yeah.
like that, even in practice or something, do it because it's amazing what you see. I just don't think it's prone to really good analyzing.
Well,
Yeah.
it's so yeah. There's stuff. Maybe the tournaments are all figuring out the tours. Okay, where and how is it going to best work? For what we need to make it look professional, and it clearly has not worked. Coaches yelling across fans.
Yeah.
Sitting
This would be, by the way, my theory with Alcaraz. One of two things. Maybe I shouldn't call it a theory. Maybe I should say like guess because it's not based on all that much. But I think there's potential that Juan Carlos wants Alcaraz's problem solving to improve and therefore wants to take the training wheels off as a means of him improving his problem solving. I think that's possible. I also think it's possible that Carlos has requested that Juan Carlos give him less. Um, and who knows what the reason for that would be. Hopefully not the criticism that sometimes he, I think, unfairly received for getting coached a lot. But I think either of those things are possible.
Yeah, good
Oh,
point.
and also, have you ever been when you're being coached? It's like I don't want to hear you every point. You know what I mean?
Yes.
No,
I mean,
definitely not.
so
Yes.
as far as
Yeah.
the visual goes, maybe it can be like football, where the on court is one person is the spokesperson, and you have some other guy in the higher up seats that you want, and they're texting from the iPad. It's like you
So
send.
and how do you choose the figurehead, Joel? Do you choose like Morgan Freeman so it's like a nice soothing voice?
Well, I don't know. It could be, for example, okay, I'm the player. I have this team. Who do I want? Who do I want my talker? Who do I want? Who gives most from where? It's kind of interesting thing to think about.
Well, that's how it was with I'm trying to think there was an instance where a coach there was only one coach. It was a two coach team, but only one coach could speak during the match.
Brad Gilbert and I forget who the
And
one was.
Parariba.
Yeah, how
I
was that?
think it's somewhat common that they make a decision of who's going to talk.
So the player says, "I'll listen," right? Because otherwise, it's going to become too much. So you're the one I like to listen to. Gather.
Well, also like how much is Michael Russell, Taylor Fritz's coach, how much is he just saying something that Paul put in his ear? But Taylor doesn't care. Not to suggest that Mike Russell doesn't have a lot of his own thoughts, but I just think there's probably scenarios where Paul says something to Mike and Mike just says it to Taylor, and that's just how it goes.
And maybe Paul gets to look all these different scenarios, and you talk to enough players like you know tennis coaches are not a lot. The NFL coaches all have a lot in common with each other. This is how you go about being an NFL coach, and you got your laminated sheet, and you got your headphone, you do your whole thing like that. But tennis coaches, some players don't want to hear anything from anyone, right? Right.
Daniil, Taylor, yeah, just to
And of
name a
course,
few.
remember, these are guys for whom it's all an add-on. It's a new thing. So it's like, hey, look, I made it to the big leagues without any of that stuff. And now it's here, whatever. However, 10 years from now, it's going to be totally different. There'll be someone, my guy, he's been with me since I was 12. Now he's with me at Wimbledon.
You
Can
know,
we?
when this was first coming up, I did a story on court coaching, what the big debate about whether it should be had or not, and I wanted to get a feel for what the players were going through. So I set up a practice match with my friend, very formal, and I had my coach me because I wanted to see what it would be like. The first game happens and I lose the first game, and I saw my coach's face and I was filled with anger. And I was like, you better get out of here. I don't want to see your face. And he said something like, but Amy, I want to talk to you about what I'm seeing. And I said, no. No. And that's not like me. And I realized all of a sudden it dawned on me what these players are going through. And especially as we move into this new era of constant access to coaching. So just keep that in mind. It's really not always easy for a player to take in that information.
You had your serve broken in the opening game,
Yes.
and you walked sides, and your coach was already. And what was your coach?
He held up a clipboard. He was like charting or something, and I was
First
like, get
game?
that out of my face.
Yeah.
I was just like filled with a rage that isn't typical of me at all. So, that will give you some level of now times that times a million with television cameras and people on the internet second guessing and people in the crowd that have been drinking too much and all sorts of stuff. I can certainly understand Taylor Fritz and Daniil Medvedev, why they are the way they are.
All right, let's end on this. Is Andy Murray going to coach Novak Djokovic again moving forward? Prediction.
Sure, give it a go. A little more, somewhere. I don't know where. Might not be every week, but yeah.
Like you said, Gil, Djokovic was playing well. I mean, I take this as a success, so why not?
3 votes for yes. Yeah, I think Andy will be showing up periodically for big events, basically, and I think he'll probably ease into the role. And I think the real question is when he's done with Novak, is he a coach? Is he gonna help Jack Draper? Like, what is this gonna be a thing or a one-off?
I think no, I think this was a neat starting consulting gig. Then it's some family time. Then eventually there'll be the Davis Cup gig.
I
Okay.
hear Emma Raducanu has a coaching opening.
I wouldn't bet on that one.
Sorry.
That'll do it for this episode of 3. Remember, we're available on all podcast platforms. Appreciate it if you leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify. And if you're watching on YouTube, like, comment, and subscribe. We will see you next time on the next episode of 3.